in our most recent discussions, we were looking at it, I think it was the last time, actually, where we talked about, you start with the 8 states of consciousness, and basically that whole chart, when it's organized in the proper way, which has taken me some time to do, and I'm not done with it yet, but first thing is that you have to look at it from the point of view of consciousness, because everything a number of conditioning factors, and these are all mental conditioning factors. In fact, that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And then those things in our head, those kinds of our conditioning ideas, our concepts about how we see things, that influences how we feel about things and actually how we see the world. So the world and how we experience the world. So the interesting thing is it's a model both of how we are in the world, is what it essentially is, in terms of kind of an ego self-other relationship. So it's just that it takes a while to kind of get into its particular mindset, which is it's that Indian mindset where they want to reduce everything in the concisest way possible. So they end up with what looks like a bunch of random lists, or lists of random, like grocery lists. This essentially, they're the masters of the grocery list, except their grocery lists are like, a whole psychological system. But it's hot in India, and they don't really have the time to, write long. They get tired after writing just a little bit because it's so humid.
Well, I kind of figured that they were stuck on a mountain by themselves for too long and didn't have anything else to do. Oh, well. So does it actually help understand does it really help you deal with your afflicted emotions?
I think it helps to learn about the conditioned. Let's say to learn about the conditioned sort of leads to the unconditioned.
Okay.
Well, I think it's helpful.
So the more you can recognize.
You're talking about afflicted emotions. When you're talking about afflicted emotions, you're talking about psychology. And this is essentially, I think, best viewed as a kind of spiritual psychology. And so the whole idea of what is an afflicted emotion, that's what's discussed in the looking at the 5 skandhas in terms of the various elements. So the 5 skandhas are form, feeling, perception, concept, and consciousness. Except here we've sort of reversed in the sense that we're seeing consciousness as a starting point. First, there's pure consciousness. Then there's kind of past subconsciousness, and then we get to sense consciousness, and then we sort of go through these conditioning factors. So the conditioning factors, and I emailed you all a list of these about 10 minutes ago.
I think I saw that.
Mental conditioning factors. And these, I said before last week, that they're called samskaras. And samskara is like, something that sticks to things. It's like, ice that sticks to your roads, or grit that sticks to the bottom of pans when you burn things. It's they're and they're these formations, and it's an interesting list. It's sort of, in a sense, it's random. What I've been working on is that I took the list that we had. One was from the Avadharma school. One was from the Yogacara school. I gathered what Trungpa had to say about it in his book, where he gives some definitions of these terms. And then I also looked at the Theravada list. And then I sort of put together this list of the 51 that made the most sense to me in terms of having to explain it or understand it. So the first thing that conditions everybody is this 5 factors that are called omnipresent factors. And they are contact, sensation, feeling, idea, and volition. So they're kind of like a kind of almost sort of a twist on the skandhas themselves. But basically, the idea here is that we're all engaging in repeated actions, and these actions have these components to them, in that we're getting into new situations, we're contacting the situations, or touching the situations, or we come into contact, it hits us a certain way through our senses, we have a certain feeling that's aroused. It gives us an idea of how to respond to the situation, and then that idea of how to respond to it, then we put into action. Although I think volition could also include non-volition, but here the idea is that we're in the samsaric world where everything just keeps moving. So all through the day, through an hour, all the time, where new situations are creating new sensations, new feelings, new ideas, new responses, and so forth. So we continually are cycling through that basic mental seasonality, if you will, that emotion of mind, as we deal with life situations. Then the next 5 mental factors that it feels that are important, and these are actually quite positive because they make the most sense as factors that allow you to get out of the first 5, or to have a spiritual path. They're spiritual determining factors. And there are 5 of these, and they are, first of all, aspiration, resolve, remembrance, samadhi, and wisdom. Remembrance is sometimes given as mindfulness. So essentially, that's a very nice short description of the Buddhist path. You're inspired, you're resolved to practice, you develop mindfulness, which is a kind of remembrance as well, and eventually you become focused, which is samadhi, sense of samadhi here, and you become insightful. So that's the kind of spiritual factors that can be present as well. The interesting thing about the determining factors is sometimes those are called occasional factors, whereas everybody's dealing with feelings and ideas and volition and sensations and situations coming up all the time in their lives. Not everybody is getting samadhi or wisdom or any of the determining factors. The next 11 factors in their list here of mental conditioning are virtuous factors. And lists change on these, but the best combination that I felt there has faith, discipline, shyness, non-grasping, compassion, clarity, energy, pliancy, awareness, equanimity, and gentleness. And these are sort of all kinds of like qualities that that one might acquire or possess. Trungpa calls all of this mind-body states. So each of these mental conditioning factors is a particular mind-body state. And for a moment, that's sort of true. These things are sometimes no more than a moment. For example, Trungpa translates faith as surrender. And if you think about it in sort of a Dzogchen sense, right, it's a kind of waking up to space, awareness, just being completely and totally present, and just sort of disappearing into space, into awareness. That kind of surrender is the sort of faith that would be extremely virtuous. Discipline is just what it is, adhering to the path. Shyness is a sense that it's virtuous not to be an attention seeker. Non-grasping is a very basic idea of detachment. You could also call that detachment. And then compassion, clarity, energy. Pliancy is an interesting one. This is one that they, in the Theravada list, which is longer than this list, which is based on Yogacara, they actually have 5 qualities of pliancy. I mean, in general, the word pliancy is talking about mental pliancy here. And in meditation, if one meditates for some time and becomes a good meditator and is able to practice shamatha and able to practice vipassana and get into the practice, over time, per the teachings, the practitioner develops what is called mental pliancy. And that's a kind of flexibility of mind, that your mind has a kind of, it can adapt to things. And that's the idea that Theravadins sort of go into this a bit deeper, and they actually have 5 different qualities. And those are mental agility, adaptability, mental elasticity, mental proficiency, and mental uprightness. So basically, these are all the things you'd like your mind to be able to be, particularly as you age. Agile, adaptable, elastic, proficient, and upright. So that's pliancy. So that's considered very virtuous. Then awareness, equanimity, sort of just a general openness to everything, acceptance of everything, and then just gentleness. The Theravadins add one here, which would be a nice one to add, actually. Tranquility as a virtuous state of mind, body. So Trungpa calls all of these as mind-body states that we tend to collect. And of course, you can, as a virtuous person, you can collect various kinds of virtues. As an afflicted person, you tend to draw various kinds of afflictions. And that is sort of then your pattern of formations that conscious energy flows through and projects out the world that you experience. But going on into the afflicted part of this, there are 6 root afflictions, the infamous 3 poisons: passion, aggression, and ignorance. The additional root afflictions: pride, doubt, and wrong view. Trungpa has an interesting substitution for wrong view. He calls the 6th affliction dogmatism. And I think by that he means stubbornness of view. That as long as I remember going back to pliancy, as long as our views are fluid, and then when we get some evidence, we change them, and then we're open to like facts and evidence and believe there's like, standards of truth and that sort of thing, then I think we're okay. It's when you just get into being, stubborn and taking a particular dogmatic line that and becoming a shill for whatever, that you're in the realm of wrong view. There's a long list of 20 secondary afflictions. Resentment, concealment, which I think is the idea of hiding things, which is an interesting one. Spite, jealousy, being stingy, lying, being deceiving, arrogant, harmfulness, shamelessness, depravity. Depravity is not exactly the word they use, but it's the one I use when I describe, like the President of the United States. So I thought, boy, that's at least good for a secondary affliction. Depression, excitement, nihilism, torpor, great word. It's not. Sometimes they say laziness. Laziness is actually not an affliction. I take exception to that. I think laziness is a sign of intelligence. But torpor, but I think being lazy could be okay. But torpor, nobody wants to be torporous. I mean, torpor has this idea of just sort of lying around in a daze, not quite with it. That would definitely be an affliction. And then we have negligence, not taking care. That's an interesting one. So it's an affliction or a non-virtue to not take care of the things you should be taking care of. I think they're good. Forgetfulness, anxiety, and distraction. So, and then they have a strange collection of 4 that could, it's not really, they're not moral qualities, they're mental factors. Some people have them a lot or not so much, but it depends on how you use them as to whether they're for the good or bad, so to speak. And that is remorse. I mean, you might have remorse that you didn't kill certain people that you would have, your former boss or something, which would not be so good. But it might be remorse for your own wickedness, whatever. So remorse, tiredness, reflection, and investigation. So that's the general idea here, is that there's these various mental states, and this is kind of a short list, but it's not quite, on the afflictions, it's not like the like there's a what is the book in psychology they use? I think there's like 400 different kinds of psychological afflictions, and you get listed in the book.
The DSM-5 or something.
So it's been, the modern version is considerably longer than the ancient Buddhist version. But it's pretty amazing. It's still a very interesting kind of portrait, analytical look at what makes up a person, and why, how these different factors are figure into our psychology, and the way they help you in terms of afflicted emotionality is by bringing them to your awareness. In that sense, it's a more product of meditation than it is a call to meditation. But in as much as one feels afflicted, the remedy is always the same. It's meditation. Everything is to be brought to the path. Everything's to be the path of awareness, the path of openness, the path of surrendering to the moment, to being in the moment, to letting it all go. And so that's there's one medicine, but there's many different thoughts that get offered up as we enter the moment.
Bruce, I was thinking it was like, well, just comparing to in education, we have these lists of standards, and you have to raise instruction up to the level of the standard, and then above that, and so I thought these, and then there's also like assessment rubrics, like if you can assess, did you hit the standard? Did you teach to it? Did the students reach reach it? And that seems like these could be seen in that way too. Like if you see as like a contemplative, reflective tool, like you see the word stinginess, and then you think it through, and then it prompts some sense like, oh, I didn't realize that small action was an example of stinginess. So you can just refine your ethical contemplation that way. You think that's a way it was? I mean, that's what I'm guessing. I'm feeling like that's maybe a way to use the Abhidharma as a tool for contemplation. Is that sound?
Yeah, I think that again, it is a list, and but it is a list of meditation. It is a list of meditation topics, and when I look at this list, it's a psychology, but it's also what we might call a list of values. I mean, these are the Buddhist values. It's some things that Buddhists value as being virtuous, other things Buddhists value as not being virtuous. And I mean, that's connected with this idea of, so you meditate on what's virtuous and encourage that in yourself. And you meditate on what's not virtuous and you discourage that in yourself. And that's how you this is sort of way in which you use these values to reduce the suffering in your life, because it's the afflicted states of body, mind that are causing us suffering. The virtuous states are just earning us good karma. But the afflicted states are definitely all causing some kind of suffering in one form or another.
be interesting to write on those topics, like so just creative writing on, or reflective writing or something as a practice.
Yeah, no, it sounds. I mean, it reads like a chapter heading for a book on, the Book of Virtue, Chapter 1, Faith. Um, each of those, I think, one of them we talked about the last class. We ended with this idea of developing our own sense of what are sort of the existential. We've talked about these values or formations, but we've also talked about them as sort of life existential factors. These are the things that define what it is to be human. I mean, all humans are engaged in with discipline one way or another. They're engaged with a sense of faith. And another word in each of these, you have to look for the kind of word that connects it for you, because different ways to say it. But for example, openness is like surrender or faith. So Buddhists are very open. Yeah, the openness is very important, and discipline is very important, and detachment and compassion and clarity and being energetic, which is like being awake and alert, being pliant or flexible. So each of these has lots of synonyms. So that's one way to meditate on these is to what are the main values? We hear there's 11 values. You have some values. What values are not on this list? What values are there that shouldn't be? I think it's very interesting because there's obviously, as this list has gone on since the 3rd century, BC, so it's been 2,300 years or more. Everyone, kind of molds it to sort of fit the world that they experience.
So how do these relate to like the paramitas? Did the paramitas get developed out of this, or there's a lot of similarities tucked away in there, I feel like. And then even like the 5 Buddha families, or the afflictions and the 6 root afflictions, seem to be a lot of overlap there. Like these other later lists in the Mahayana and Vajrayana, did they just keep on dipping back into this the Abhidharma generally?
Yeah, well, this is sort of proto Prajnaparamita. It's those virtues, the 6 paramitas, discipline appears.
Mm-hmm.
But it's actually a mix, because it's also these spiritual factors that were it's an interesting question, because samadhi and wisdom are obviously come from the determining factors. It might be interesting to look at it another way, and that is that these determining factors, in the same way that I'm going to go on a limb here, but the same way that the 6 root afflictions sort of manifest as a variety of secondary afflictions, the virtuous factors of faith and discipline and all of that are a result of these spiritual root factors. These determining factors are sort of like spiritual root factors. Okay, so that really, unless there's aspiration, resolve, mindfulness, focus and insight, there's not going to be much virtue in these virtuous factors. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They're all, in fact, expressions, if you will, of these very kind of root root virtues.
So, like, faith could become dogmatism if it didn't have aspiration or something like that?
Yeah. Or without mindfulness, discipline would be pretty shoddy.
Yeah.
But definitely certain kinds of afflicted mental states. These are, they're sort of like, they're trendy. That's why I threw in depravity. I mean, I think depravity is kind of like having, a trendy time lately. Nihilism is also a particular vice of our current century. Distraction and anxiety. Those are modern sorts of afflictions. And then some are just like lying, deceit, arrogance. I mean, those are just perennial afflictions, Anger, resentment. And some of these are a little weak. I think we might be able to replace them with better secondary ones, like concealment and spite seem to be a little weak. Harmfulness is a little unspecific.
I like concealment. It's like
I don't quite. I'm trying to get the idea of. I mean, basically, this is developed from. This is mainly of monks and lay people who are on a spiritual path. And if you're such a person, you shouldn't be hiding anything. You should sort of live your life openly, as it were. So that seems to me to be the idea. Did you have another sense of it?
No.
Why do you like?
I just think
Sneaky.
Yeah, sneaky. That's good. Hiding something. It kind of is counter to like a sense of privacy or American right of privacy.
I mean, it could be an extension of lying too. I mean, I could see concealment and lying be one and the same. I mean, if you have a relationship with somebody and you conceal something that is possibly hurting them or would hurt them if they found out. I mean, I feel it's engendering distrust in a relationship, I think.
Yeah. Makes sense to me.
I mean, there's a lot of things that people should. A lot of times you can take from people. It's actually Trump called it the inscrutable, and essentially that it's not so much that there's just some things that people don't understand, and so you don't burden them with things that they're not able to comprehend. like for example, like you buy something very expensive, and perhaps your spouse doesn't understand that you need this. So it's best to conceal this fact if you can, because this will, avoid the situation of having them have to deal with something they can't comprehend.
It seems like a tricky, like you.
Unless you use all your savings to buy.
If you created some sort of hardship where now the kids are going to have to like go to work, that would qualify as concealment. But it's sort of like lying. I mean, everybody knows that lying is a vice, and the kind of rank lying that goes on these days is totally shameful. But there's all sorts of situations where it's just much easier to navigate through life situations if you don't give a totally factual answer to certain questions, because it's better just to kind of, if they're not important, and it's best to just sort of move things along without getting distracted. So they're higher virtues than not all being truthful on small matters. It's the whole idea with lying, of course, is what's the motivation behind it. I mean, is it really to benefit the situation, or is it not, or is it to benefit yourself? Of course, sometimes, most of us, benefiting ourselves and benefiting the situation are the same thing.
So could you have you have determining factors branch out into the virtuous factors? Could you have a determining factor like remembrance or mindfulness branch out into a secondary affliction, in the sense that I want to be mindful of someone else's well-being and not, I don't know. Concealment seems like the only one, though. Like, I'm not going to tell them this because it would just disturb them. But I don't know that you could make that kind of, like, being harmful. You can't be harmful out of mindfulness, really. I guess maybe see lying or something. You can't be torpid.
Well, maybe we should read it. We could also read it as not being open.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, again, I'm trying to sort of think of modern kinds of virtues and afflictions, but being closed or closed-minded is a kind of concealment that is problematic today. I mean, that people are just not open. So that kind of being closed is a kind of hiding yourself from the truth.
Mm-hmm.
You guys still there?
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm just looking at the list. Any other questions or comments?
I keep on coming back to this. I want writing a poem for each of these. Just I think that could be interesting, like or a memory or something, or
Or painting.
or painting. Yeah, just some way to
Sculpture.
make it like a contemplative toolbox, really. Right? It seems like it could have a lot of potentiality.
Well, psychology today is that when we first studied these, and I first studied these in the 1970s when I went to the seminary for 3 months. I took a course in the Abhidharma. That was one of the courses that Trungpa had people teach. We had a book, and the book was basically on. It was written by a couple of psychologists, and it was the 52 mental factors, something Buddhist psychology, and you have to remember 1970s psychology was not very sophisticated compared to modern neuroscience, but it was more dealt with things like values. So back in the 60s and 70s, values were a big thing. So this was very interesting because we created this whole list of kind of essentially that our perception of the world is an outgrowth of our values, and who we are in the world is an outgrowth of our values. And if we have afflicted values, and afflicted is kind of a, if we have bad values, then it's going to create problems. And if we have good values, and this whole idea ties into the whole idea of karma as well. So why do things happen the way they do? And it's because of the energy that we're bringing to the situation, and then how that energy that we bring into the situation bounces back on us, and also creates our character, so that we have these continual predispositions to kind of add further layers to these scars here, these samskaras, to lay down, make them even harder and stronger with each additional action. So there's a lot of material for reflection.
I think it would be interesting to actually get more personal with the list and actually share, look at the list of maybe the afflictions and share examples from your own personal experience about, what you've done and what you think that is in terms of what the afflictions are. Because some of these could be subtle. I mean, there would be there's going to be some that are obvious and some that maybe are less obvious. Like, is it stinginess if I always just give 20% tip on a bill? Does that mean I'm stingy? I don't know. But it might be. Just that to me would be kind of more of experiential rather than have it be sort of this theoretical meditative process. It's just, apply it now.
Well, if you want to apply it now, I'd actually go a step further and say, well, how about today? All right. What sort of things was I running around doing? Let's go to the omnipresent factors. All of us, each of us today, ran around and did a bunch of things. And what were those things? And how productive were they? And how we feel about that? And then we could contemplate how much we generated of the root virtues of, inspiration and resolve and mindfulness and focus and insight. Think about that. And then we could think about how open we were. I'm leaning to open for number one. How disciplined we were, how modest or detached. Selfless might be a nicer word for the shyness. So forth and so on. Yeah, we'll go right down the list and look at what today was like. We say, oh, today was good. I didn't get angry today. I wasn't spiteful today.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah.
One of the directions that they would meditate on these in the past was that they would sort of look at them in terms of combinations. So sometimes when they're reflecting on things in their lives, they would see that, it was a combination of things, or they would see how one mental state gives way to another mental state. And again, the whole general sense of it is that there's no solid person here. There's just a bunch of mental states, coming and going. One moment we're clear, the next moment we're jealous of something. We're just jumping all over the place, and it's just sort of like all the energy that we have is flowing through all of these mental states, and that gives us, our experience of things. So why we have the experience we have is being demonstrated in that way.
I wonder, is forgetfulness, where would forgetfulness, would that be like, that would be in the changeable factor maybe? Because if you forget to practice like I did today, that would be not so good. But if you forget somebody doing harm to you, I mean, you just sort of let go of it, that would be good.
Well,
the ability to forget
factors, yeah. The changeable factors is almost all of these in some sense. I mean, a lot of these could be changeable in terms of the root underlying motivation. I mean, Trungpa talks about how all the virtues, can be a problem if they just puff you up, or that you get into being a professional goody-goody type person who's always going around, extremely virtuous with no signs of affliction of any kind, and so forth. So, in some ways, a lot of these have that potential to be context specific as to their moral character.
That makes sense. That seems a little more nuanced. Though some of them are, anger. Anger is one of those things where most of the time it's just an affliction. Probably 99% of the time it's an affliction. But there is, I think, times when it's just the right thing that needs to happen.
Maybe that's resolve. It becomes a determining factor in that sense. I mean, just semantic change there, but it's the same kind of energy.
Well, no, I think the energy of anger. Well, I guess it just depends on whether or not you can maintain some clarity or something through it, because anger is incredibly energetic, and it's a lot of power. I mean, it's just a lot of your whole system gets kind of fantastically puffed up for a second.
Yeah.
And if you actually have to do something that needs that kind of energy, then you're actually able to focus it and use it. But yeah, if you're deeply angry and you are able to feed that into a point of resolve, so that you have a disciplined behavior that's supported by the anger and the resolve, then that you're basically kind of morphing it into something useful.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's possible. I get angry at somebody, a person, because they mess something up. They're too slow or something like that. That's just a basic afflicted anger. But if I get
Right.
angry at injustice because I see somebody who's weak being treated badly by somebody who should be doing better, who could be doing better, and that makes me angry, and then that provokes some response on my part to try and address that situation. That could be a positive thing.
Right. That's what I mean.
I get drawn into situations primarily by getting angry locally. If I get angry at something and then I work to try to fix it. Although lately I find that it's very difficult because more and more, no, I feel like I live in a world of facts, but that I'm not finding other people who want to, be in that.
Don't.
I mean, we were talking in a discussion, we were talking about truth, and it's really important that people have truth as a value. And I said, well, it doesn't matter think you're true, you're telling the truth, if you're not informed.
Mm-hmm.
And very few people are informed, so it's very hard to have any discussion of what's true or not because so many people are so ill informed about so many different kinds of things that you get quite a bit of problem that way.
I saw a good just visual on this point a while back. It was like a big circle, and then inside the big circle there was a little tiny dot, and then outside. So then the big circle was what you think you know, and the little tiny dot in that big circle was what you actually know. And then, of course, there's the whole world outside of even the big circle. And it was like, basically, we all go around thinking we know way more than we do. And this is a human condition to fill in the gaps in our knowledge with some kind of explanation or assumption, or like we fill in the gaps visually, and when we don't quite see something, or somebody doesn't completely say something, then we start getting inferential and start adding. And then the same thing with all the knowledge, any topic comes up where we have to have an opinion about it, and that opinion we just think we know.
So, with the realization that you just know the tiny dot and there's all that space around you, would that be the realization of emptiness?
I think that'd be more like humility. But I don't know.
Yeah, but you would be coloring in or trying to color in the rest of the space with your own perceptions, or you just recognize it as you don't know.
Yeah.
Emptiness.
Well, I think it has to do with different orientation in terms of willing to live with partial information and based on probabilities. Is that we have a view of things, and the intelligent way to live is to have a fairly accurate sense of probabilities, and then sort of base your decisions on what is the most likely outcome of that, and what you feel to be that way. And in that sense, you're very flexible because as you get new information and your sense of what's plausible and what's not plausible, what's probable and not probable changes, you weigh things differently and you can adjust and adapt. Problems come in because people want certainty. They don't want uncertainty, which is sort of the idea here that we just sort of work on basis of our best knowledge. But they want some sort of certainty. Well, the only way you can have certainty is if you kind of make if you say something beyond what the
Mm-hmm.
the evidence supports. So essentially, you're making something up, and that's what people do. So then they continually rehearse that view. Anything that has to be continually rehearsed. I mean, if you have to watch, Fox News, or you have to, whatever, you have to keep your views up to get, then that kind of, or you have to go to church and get the, indoctrinated over and over and over and over again. That's a tip off that, you're looking for certainty. You're not looking for truth. And those are two different things.
Mm-hmm. So I don't. What about emptiness? And I mean, that seems like, that could be like to live in uncertainty that could instigate some kind of realization of emptiness. Although I don't know. I'm not sure. I have an incoherent sense of that, but it seems right.
Well, you're mixing up a couple different things there. In your metaphor, you were talking about, the circle of what I know and what I think I know and what is really out there, which is on one level. But basically, knowledge is context specific sort of product that in the moment, which is an empty moment, everything is empty and I don't know anything. I don't know anything until I need to know something. I need to know something that I can, I may or may not be able to produce it. And I may or may not be able to correctly gauge my ability to produce different kinds of knowledge in specific contexts and so forth. But practically, each moment, we're just here, present, available, open, empty. We don't carry around any knowledge at all. That's the kind of not knowing. That's the ultimate pliability. We don't bring anything into it except the aware mind, ready to move the way the energy is moving.
Well, goodness is like the whole list of a description of emptiness in a inferred way that you can't really have knowledge of the unconditioned because that goes against the meaning of unconditioned. So all you can know is the conditioned, and then that leads to the unconditioned. I don't know. I'm hung up on that basically.
Which one are you hung up on?
I think I'm just fascinated by that idea of that we can't really know the unconditioned except through the conditioned. By knowing what's conditioned, we can we understand the unconditioned or something.
Well, when the conditioned falls away, then what's left is the unconditioned.
Yes.
That's one way of touching it. And the condition is always falling away. Each moment, that's the idea of the kind of the birth and death each. I mean, things are rising each moment too, but things are dying each moment, and yet that's all happening within a space. And if we can experience the space in which things are being born and being dying, that space, which is always present, which is the primordial, which is the unconditioned, that frees us from being a prisoner of the condition because we have an alternative. Now you could be like me and you could see that alternative and get bored with it and go back to the conditioned world and just, trundle about. Or you could, go and liberate and go off to Africa and be a missionary or something. But the important thing is that you have that knowledge of the unconditioned.
And by knowledge, you're kind of meaning experience. I mean, knowing, not knowing as in a mental knowing, but the experiential knowledge.
Total faith and confidence in the unconditioned.
Wow, that would be. That seems paradoxical.
Have total faith and confidence in the unconditioned.
Yeah.
Well,
Because
you have to understand the unconditioned it's not like it's not the theistic God who's making sure nothing bad happens to you. This
well, I know.
This unconditioned plays rock. I mean, it doesn't play at all. Actually, it just provides the field in which.
Well, that's part of where the word faith in this context is confusing because it seems like faith is one of those words that always has an object. And what is faith if it doesn't have an object? I don't understand what faith without an object is. You're always having faith in something.
It's the actual dynamic of is what happens in faith is that there's a surrender. It's in the Christian sense, not my will but thy will, that kind of thing. But here in Buddhism, it's not quite personal that way. It's more just a drop, just being open. Just letting your thoughts and your preoccupation, whatever is on your mind, just drop it. Just be here, be present.
Dropping agendas.
Faith in Buddha nature.
So that openness is probably that's my favorite. That's my, as I said, I'm liking that one the best. Because people do think of it, like faith in Jesus, faith in a Savior. That could be a virtue, but that's a tough one for contemporary times because very few people have that kind of faith. I think that kind of faith is really conceptualized anyway. I think it's, if you say this is terrible to say, but if you have faith in Jesus, it's almost like if something has to be maintained all the time or sustained, if it's not naturally occurring, then it's sort of manufactured. And I think that means that there's always going to be a lot of effort involved. Whereas when you think of just openness, it's more like the idea of just relaxing and being present, or even if you were put it in Christian terms, relaxing and being with God. So there's no struggle or anything. It's a quality of relaxation and being present.
But
I have the faith that I can do that any whenever I want, and in that sense, almost anything I want.
Well, and that's from years of practice.
Yeah, you develop a natural state of openness.
Yeah, and that would be, I would assume that would be comparable to a Christian practice, whatever their practice is they're building they're building a mental, an ability and I'm actually a little uncomfortable hearing you say that having faith in Jesus is fundamentally somehow less than than because I think because we're so wow, somebody's got to mute it.
Somebody needs to mute.
I muted the wrong person here. It switched on me. Diane, unmute if you can. It switches on me as I turn to. Oh man, I'm sorry, Diane.
Well, I think that is the actual experience. I think you have faith in God, and because I've experienced that faith. But for me, God is the primordial, and the the Zopacento. So I have that experience continually. So it's real easy to have faith in it. It's always what's always present. I think the problem comes with, and that's just naturally there. So it doesn't require any effort on my part at all, other than the recognition of its being there. So that's sort of Gnostic idea. I think the problem with most religion is that people don't have an actual experience of some presence, whether it's of the whole or some divine part of it. And so they're just sort of trying to pump it up. And
Was it like the image? You can go to you can have. It's like having faith in Padmasambhava, the same as having faith in Jesus. That the image gives way to the openness. Like you use the image and the devotional practices as a means, as like a ladder or some kind of.
but all of these deities, whether they're Jesus or Padmasambhava or Tara or Avalokiteshvara or Medicine Buddha, they're all expressions of your higher being. I mean, you have to give the being that makes these images come to life. They're coming to life on the basis of your energy for you as you meditate and experience them. And that's the whole idea in terms of deity practice. You're going to experience the energy of the deity because you're going to be the deity, because you're actually you were always creating the deity anyway. The deity is simply an expression of this ascendant or spiritual force within you. So that type of relationship, what you want is a relationship with your your higher self. But your higher self is also just your open, surrendered self, and that's as high as it gets. So if you can open and be empty in the moment, you are Padmasambhava. I mean, what can Padmasambhava do that tops that? I mean, you could do some miracles, but it's okay. What's more important, being open or doing miracles? If you could do miracles but you weren't open, then you're just a cheap sorcerer, right? It's the openness that makes it, so the openness is the key thing. And we have that. Just like Padmasambhava and Christ and whoever.
Am I still muted?
No, you're unmuted.
No, we can hear you.
Sorry about that, Diane.
Okay. Wouldn't I just hung up and came back in because it seemed like no one was hearing me. So I missed the end of what you were saying, Bruce, but you were talking about the deity practice of being part of the one's larger self or higher self or transcendent energy. Or I'm not quite sure exactly how you said it, but
I
yeah,
think
I
there are different ways to relate to a deity. And I was getting back to your earlier question when I was my rude comment about people on Jesus, is that if you see these as external beings, these saviors as external to yourself, I think then you're in a situation where it's going to have to be maintained by your constant, manufacturing that relationship and manufacturing, because there's nothing is actually external to yourself. That it's all within yourself, and that all the deities, Christ, Padmasambhava, and Tara, and all the rest are within you, and they're it's your spiritual energies that animate those deities.
well, that's currently my current point of view also, but I'm understanding that people who get into that I thou relationship with a deity, that's a position that you can take you very far into a developed spiritual state and energy, and so you can get there from you can get where you need to go from there. So it's not necessarily it's just a different pathway as opposed to it being less than.
Okay.
Because then, of course, we're setting ourselves up as being the people who know what's really real, and we're right and they're wrong. So I'm like, wait a minute.
Well, I think a lot of it is trying to impose something. I think it is possible to have sort of I-thou relationships. I mean, I have relationships with invisible entities, so to speak. And so I get, so if someone has a relationship with Jesus, who's an invisible entity, in that, I-thou type of relationship, I can understand that. But I think that in a genuine relationship of that kind, it's a natural process. And there's they talk about the disclosure of God or the disclosure of the deity. So the deity is actually putting some energy towards you, and you're putting energy toward, it's a mutual exchange of energies. And it flows. It doesn't have to be, there's nothing artificial or manipulative about it. I think what the majority of religion, I think going back to my original comment, majority of religion from what I've seen is a lot of making things up because you don't actually have the experience. Not even the experience of a relationship, of a natural relationship with that type.
It's more of a political relationship, as the religion is a political identity or something.
It's a conceptual relationship, belief.
Right. Yeah, that I would say pretty much I'd say that's organized religion on the organizational level is certainly that way.
I mean,
I'd be hard put to say to a person sitting across from me to be commenting on the quality of their relationship with their inner secret divine seems like a risky position to take. So, but
well, yeah, except that people are people show their minds all the time, so you can sort of see where people are at. I mean, I see a lot of people, and
Of course, you're hanging out with Christians now, aren't you?
Well, somewhat.
Yeah.
I hang out with all kinds of people, but I hang out with some of those too. And there are people that have genuine, have a genuine, different kinds. There's different kinds of ways they do it, but they're really not. It's generally not mystical, in like Eastern religions, like even Buddhism, is mystical. I mean, they're not really. It's all very vague.
It brings up the idea of Samaya Sattva and the Jnana Sattva. When you spoke of your energies sort of combining or like going towards each other type.
You could say that there's a lot of Samaya Sattva being generated without a lot of Jhana Sattva entering it. In other words, there's a lot of form being produced without the spirit, really inhabiting it. I mean, yeah, you can create all kinds of forms, but the spirit is very mercurial. It comes and goes as it wishes. Well, we have run past our due time here. I don't know. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Thanks.
We will meet again next week.
Thank you.
All right.
Good night.
By this.
Take care. Good night.
By this spirit,
And spirit.
all
All
keep the enemy wrongdoing. Every way of the ocean,
all beings. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.